Hey everybody, this is Dark Guardsman. We're back with another video here. So we're going to do a tutorial here, kind of both as a chance to let me teach Grogger how to build game objects and stuff, and as to get a little practice and do tutorials, as I do plan to eventually do tutorials in both game development and mod development. Anyways, for this tutorial we're just going to build a building. Really simple, but it's a good introduction into creating game objects, messing with sprites, and getting your stuff in the scene and looking just right. So for starting with is we're going to need some sprites. Now, Grogger actually sent me some buildings. He did these in PowerPoint. So might I note that this is not meant to be used for graphics, but it does work. You see this? These images actually are really good, and they do look pretty decent for what they are. Usually you expect not to see this kind of detail done in anything outside of an actual dedicated graphics program. But we need to actually get these exported in a way we can do something with them, which is going to be interesting here. So I'm going to see if we can figure out a way to actually get these exported. So file, we can print them, which will give us something. Can we print as a could do PDF printing, which is not how we do it. Let's check the export options. I think when it's down here, oh yeah, we do get a few different options. PNG, let's try that. And we get this actually exported right on the desktop too. And let's do all slides too, so we get all of our images exported at once. Now, of course, you would be doing these in something like Paint, Paint.net, GIMP, something that is really dedicated towards doing graphics. Now, that should have put this on my desktop here somewhere. Yep, right here, structures. And it exported each slide as individual, so that's really cool. So we're going to rename these, and we're going to name structure 1, structure 2. That way we have a separate image here. Now we could merge these into the same image with each other as well. And there is advantages to having all of your stuff on one image. It does render a bit faster, but it does depend on what you're doing, and there are limitations that I don't fully understand myself, so I'm not going to try to explain something that even I don't understand very well. So we're going to toss these into our folder. Now these do have white on the background instead of alpha transparency, so you will have to take that into consideration when using this stuff. The good news is we could pretty much just open these up in GIMP and edit them if we want to, but I'm just going to show you guys how to get the buildings going, and then you guys can figure out all the image editing stuff yourself. Now, because we have multiple images on here, and with a white background here, we're going to want to do the sprite editor system, and we're going to want to set this multi. So if you have more than one image on your thing, you want to do multi. If you only have a single image, do single. It doesn't really matter. If you have a white background and not transparent with a single image, you also want to do the same kind of step with sprite editor. Now with the multi, what we want to do is basically select our image here that we're going to be using. And if you had a single image, you would basically do the same exact thing, but you'd only do it once. And that way you can get the white background cut out, and then that way you can also make sure that everything is set to be exactly right. As well with your images, depending on what you're doing with them and how you're building them, you can also mess around with the pivots to change how your stuff pivots. We of course want these to pivot in the center because this is meant to be an actual building, and we will be rotating it around the center. You can also change how you want your pivot unit to be handled. You can do it by pixels and normalization. You can change all of your stuff handled here, and you can change your name. So we're going to call this building_1 because I don't know what these buildings are actually meant for, so I can't actually say that this building is meant for this and so on and so on. The cool thing, by the way, when you're doing this and messing with this, if you do make mistakes or you don't like the way something's done, or you need to come through and make the building smaller or bigger later in your texture sheet, you can come back and edit this whenever you want. And it shall update in-game as well, so you don't have to worry about having problems, so long as you name stuff the same down here. If you do change the name, it may cause problems. I've had issues with tile sheets, at least with that. So we call this building_2. I think this is meant to be the barracks building, is what that one's meant to be. As well, this one could be used as a barracks building. I'm curious if that tiling is meant to be under that background, because that almost looks like a GIMP background tile. And this is building_3. So we're not going to do all of our buildings, we're just going to do these 3, and we'll get them built out. So that gives us our sprites, and if we actually go down here, we'll see now we have 3 different sprites, and you see you don't have the white backgrounds behind them anymore, so it understands where the limits of that image actually are, which is really good for us. Now to actually make the images, because we're going to put these down in here and probably move them around and organize them and play around with the images. But for the tutorial, we want to basically do game object create empty, which we'll put right here. I prefer to use an empty game object to make buildings or any type of asset. The reason for this is that way I have a object that then is separate from all my sprites, that are separate from any other logic I need to do this with. And as well, if I decide, for example, I want to use 3 of these assets all together, I can attach multiple sprites to my empty game object. And what we'll do with this is you right click the empty game object, 2D object, that's what we want to do on here, add a sprite, and we just name this building, and then we can also name this, let's just call this building, we could say office or something. And with our sprite here, we drag it right into here. You can also click the dot next to here and select from all the sprites you have in your game and everything else. It'll allow you to do anything. You can change how the draw mode works, slice, tiled, whatever. For doing a building, simple is all we really need. We don't need to mess with anything with that. We do, however, need to scale this building. It's really, really small. You could, if you wanted to, come over here and change your pixel per unit to say something like 10 and hit apply, and that would change your building size. This is something you can do. I have a tendency not to mess with this one because I just like to scale things up in the editor itself. It really depends on what you're doing and how you want to achieve things. So I could do this and scale this up to get a nice 10 by 10 building, or I could scale it to say 5 by 5 because that's a bit big. So that's a nice size building that I can now stick right there. And will fit in there. Now, by itself, visually, this works. This is about enough. If you're just making a visual scene that you have nothing else to do with, this works for you. You can then set the position. You can set your little rotation here, so you can just rotate it by 20 degrees, so on and so on. You can mess with shaders on it if you wanted to. I have yet to figure out shaders when it comes to sprite render and stuff, so you may have to do something more advanced if you want to do that. Now, if you actually do plan to use this in the game level, which is what we plan to do, make sure that, one, you didn't accidentally misalign your building object like I just did. When you're moving your objects with doing this style, make sure you don't have your texture selected. Make sure you actually have your building selected. That way you can move it and it doesn't throw the center of this building off. So we do want to, if we're doing this for a game scene, we do want to add a box slider 2D. And the box slider, if you notice what it starts off with, is going to be the wrong size. Now, if you did your sprite actually on the lower object, which is one of the strategies we can do. We can actually do this, come down here, add this, and actually add a box slider. It will default the box slider to the correct size of the sprite sheet. It's a bit smart, it's nicer that way. You could do it this way, or you could put it on the main body. It doesn't matter, it just depends on what you're trying to achieve. The ideal behind, of course, doing it where you have multiple sprites on here is that I can actually make game objects that say have 2 sprites. I can then move this right next to each other, and I now have a double building that I can place and maneuver and do whatever I want with. I could even, if I decided to want to mess around with the artwork, and have one of these inside each other, and it would do relatively good. Now, the final step, if you are using at least my format for this, is you are going to want to take into consideration what sorting layer you put this on. The sorting layer does matter if you are making your own game. For my game, the buildings need to be either on the entity layer or somewhere else. Entity layer is the preferable way because that ensures that it does render on the correct layer. All the tanks render on the entity level, all the monsters render on the entity level, all the, well, not monsters, but enemy drones. The only thing that does not render on the entity layer when it comes to moving objects and stuff is things like flying units, so you want to make sure it is on the right layer. You can also change the sorting order to make sure it gets put on a different layer depending on how you want to achieve things. This could be useful if you are stacking stuff up. Say, for example, I want to have this building render on the other one because maybe the building next to it's a multi-story building, and that this is part of the first floor. Then we can come up to here, select this as an entity layer, put this as layer 1, it will still render above it, and we play around with it and move stuff around and get all that stuff set up. Another thing we also want to do with this is we do want to make sure everything is in the map layer. The reason for doing this does matter when it comes to doing the pathfinding for the AIs. AIs only identify stuff on the map layer. And then we can put that on here. And then if you want to, you can also make this static, which doesn't really do anything, just kind of helps with performance depending on what you're doing. And yeah, we can move this around. We can now spawn this. We can now duplicate this. This is a pretty much done object we can place around. That's pretty simple when it comes to making buildings. So end of tutorial, and I'll see you guys later.